Her father raised her with love. Years later, she repaid him in the most beautiful way. When the ambulance lights flashed through the windows of her Manhattan apartment, Fiona knew her life was about to change forever. Welcome back, and enjoy the story. The urgent call had come just after midnight. Her father's neighbor, Mrs. Henson, spoke in panicked fragments about a crash, unresponsiveness, and paramedics. Fiona's hands trembled as she ended the call, her mind racing to process what she'd heard. Howard Bennett, the man who had raised her single-handedly after her mother abandoned them when she was just 3 years old, had suffered a devastating stroke. The strong, vibrant man who had taught her to ride a bicycle, helped with science projects, and cheered at every piano recital, now lay helpless in a hospital bed, unable to speak or move the right side of his body. Fiona's luxurious Manhattan apartment suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. The floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering city skyline, the designer furniture carefully selected by her personal shopper, the awards and accolades lining her shelves, none of it mattered. Now, she sank onto the edge of her Italian leather sofa, struggling to breathe as reality crashed over her in waves. Her father needed her, and she hadn't visited him in Vermont for nearly 2 years. Morning found her packing a small suitcase with mechanical movements, her mind elsewhere as she stuffed clothing into the bag without regard for wrinkles or coordination. As a senior investment banker at Blackwood Financial, Fiona had trained herself to compartmentalize emotions, to push aside personal concerns in favor of logic and strategy. But the practiced composure was failing her now. Her hands shook as she called her executive assistant to clear her calendar. "How long will you be gone?" Charlotte asked, her tone carefully professional despite the early hour. "I don't know," Fiona replied, surprising herself with the admission of uncertainty. In her carefully orchestrated life, she always knew what came next. "A few days, perhaps a week. I'll call you when I know more." The cab ride to the airport passed in a blur of city lights and shadows. Fiona stared at her reflection in the window, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. At 38, she had achieved everything she had set out to accomplish, professionally. Her corner office overlooking Central Park symbolized everything she had worked for, but she rarely called her father, always too busy with client meetings and international conference calls. Her apartment was filled with expensive furniture, but devoid of family photos or personal mementos. What did that say about her life, about her priorities? 3 distinctive traits had defined Fiona throughout her adult life. Her unyielding perfectionism that made her both respected and feared in the boardroom, her inability to trust others after her mother's abandonment, and her deep-seated fear of vulnerability that kept her romantic relationships brief and superficial. Her internal conflict centered on her belief that success and emotional connection were mutually exclusive, that to achieve greatness one must sacrifice personal relationships. The flight to Burlington was turbulent, matching Fiona's internal state. When she finally arrived at the small regional hospital in rural Vermont, the stark contrast between this place and the gleaming medical centers of Manhattan hit her hard. The corridors were clean but worn, the equipment dated but functional. Nothing about this place suggested cutting-edge care. Dr. Palmer, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, led her to her father's room. "He's stable now," he explained, his voice low. "The stroke affected the left hemisphere of his brain, which controls speech and movement on the right side. We've done what we can here, but he'll need extensive rehabilitation." Fiona barely heard him, her attention fixed on the figure in the hospital bed. Howard Bennett looked small and frail, nothing like the robust man who had split firewood just last winter, according to his Christmas letter, a letter she had skimmed while multitasking during a conference call. His right arm lay limp atop the blanket. His face drooped on one side, and his eyes, once bright with mischief and wisdom, seemed dulled by confusion. "Dad," she whispered, moving to his bedside. Howard's eyes found hers, and a flicker of recognition passed through them. He tried to speak, but only garbled sounds emerged. Frustration crossed his face, followed by what looked like shame. Fiona reached for his hand, feeling the papery skin beneath her fingers. "It's okay," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I'm here now. Everything's going to be fine." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Nothing about this was fine, and they both knew it. When Fiona arrived at the Vermont hospital, she planned to make arrangements for a professional caregiver and return to New York within days. However, the rural town's limited healthcare resources meant quality care was virtually unavailable. The small community hospital was discharging her father in just 72 hours, expecting family to take responsibility. 3 days? Fiona repeated, staring at Dr. Palmer in disbelief. He can barely communicate. He can't walk. How can you possibly release him so soon? Dr. Palmer's expression was sympathetic, but firm. I understand your concern, Miss Bennett, but this is a small hospital with limited resources. Your father is medically stable. He needs rehabilitation now, not acute care. Then we'll transfer him to a rehabilitation center, Fiona said decisively, already reaching for her phone. The nearest facility with an opening is in Burlington, and that's a 3-month wait, Dr. Palmer explained patiently. This is rural. Vermont, not Manhattan. Our resources are limited. Reality crashed over Fiona like a cold wave. She had assumed her money could solve this problem, as it solved most others in her life. But here, in this small town where she had grown up, some things couldn't be expedited with wealth or influence. Despite her executive assistant's frantic calls about a pending merger worth millions, Fiona made a spontaneous decision to take a 2-week leave of absence. She temporarily moved back into her childhood home, a place she had avoided for almost a decade, filled with memories both comforting and painful. The house stood at the end of a maple-lined driveway, a 2-story colonial with white clapboard siding and dark green shutters. Snow still clung to the north side of the roof, even though spring was technically underway. As Fiona pulled into the driveway, she felt a disorienting sense of time compression, as if the years she'd spent building her career in New York had somehow been just a brief interlude. Inside, everything was eerily familiar. The creaking 3rd step on the staircase, the slight draft from the living room window, the faint smell of wood smoke and pine cleaner. Her father had maintained the house meticulously, just as he always had. Family photos lined the hallway, snapshots of Fiona throughout her childhood and adolescence, school portraits showing her progression from gap-toothed first grader to serious high school valedictorian. There were no photos from her adult life. She'd never sent any. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. Standing in the kitchen, Fiona felt a wave of guilt wash over her. The calendar hanging beside the refrigerator showed her birthday circled in red, along with a note, "Call Fiona, 7 p.m. She'd been in a late meeting that evening and had texted her father later that night with a brief thank you for his voicemail. The refrigerator door held a Christmas card she'd sent, the only piece of correspondence from her, amid drawings from neighborhood children and postcards from her father's friends. Fiona spent the first night preparing the downstairs study to serve as a bedroom for her father, who wouldn't be able to manage the stairs. She worked methodically, moving furniture, installing the portable safety rails the hospital had recommended, and making up the convertible sofa with fresh linens. Working with her hands provided a strange comfort, allowing her to focus on practical matters rather than the emotional storm brewing inside her. The next morning, she drove to the town's only pharmacy to fill her father's prescriptions. Wakefield was a small community where families had lived for generations, where people still greeted each other by name on the street. Fiona had forgotten this aspect of small-town life, or perhaps she had deliberately pushed it from her mind. "Fiona Bennett, is that you?" The pharmacist, Alice Mercer, peered over her glasses with a warm smile. "My goodness, how long has it been? Your father must be thrilled to have you home." Fiona managed a polite smile, uncomfortable with the familiar way Alice addressed her. In New York, she was Ms. Bennett, a senior executive who commanded respect with her title and reputation. Here she was just Howard's daughter, the local girl who'd gone off to the big city. "It's been a while," she admitted, sliding the prescriptions across the counter. "I'm just here temporarily to help Dad get settled after his stroke." Alice's face softened with concern. We've all been so worried about Howard. Such a terrible thing to happen to such a good man. The whole town's been asking about him." She lowered her voice confidentially. "Pastor Williams has organized a meal. Train. And Betty from the diner said she'd be bringing over his favorite pot roast tomorrow." Fiona blinked, momentarily speechless. In her world, people didn't simply show up with home-cooked meals during difficult times. They sent expensive flower arrangements or made donations to appropriate charities. "That's very kind," she managed, "but it's not necessary." "I've made arrangements." Alice gave her a knowing look. "Honey, in Wakefield we take care of our own. Your father has been there for half the people in this town at one time or another. Now it's our turn to be there for him." She handed over the filled prescriptions. "And for you too." As Fiona left the pharmacy, her phone rang. Charlotte's name flashed on the screen. "Fiona, I'm sorry to bother you, but Mr. Harrington is demanding a personal update on the Westlake merger. He says if you can't join the call this afternoon, he'll have no choice but to assign Daniel as the lead." Fiona felt a familiar surge of competitive determination. Daniel Reed had been trying to edge her out for years, taking credit for her strategies and positioning himself to claim her clients. The Westlake merger was potentially the most significant deal of her career, representing months of careful negotiation and strategy. "Set up a video call for 3 o'clock, she said, climbing into her rental car. "I'll log in from my father's house." "Are you sure?" Charlotte sounded surprised. "If you need more time—" 3 o'clock, Fiona repeated firmly. "And send me the latest projection reports immediately." That afternoon, Fiona sat at her father's kitchen table, her laptop open to a spreadsheet of financial projections. She wore a blazer over her casual top, her hair pulled back in a professional bun, armor for the corporate battle ahead. The call connected, revealing a conference room of suited executives staring expectantly at her. "Gentlemen," she began, smoothly, launching into an analysis of the merger prospects with her customary precision and confidence. 15 minutes into the call, a knock at the front door interrupted her flow. Fiona ignored it, continuing her presentation. The knocking grew more persistent. "Excuse me a moment," she said tightly, muting her microphone. She strode to the door, irritation building. An elderly man stood on the porch, holding a covered casserole dish. "Hello there, you must be Howard's daughter. I'm Frank Whitman from down the street. Thought you folks could use a home-cooked meal with everything going on." Before Fiona could respond, another car pulled into the driveway. A middle-aged woman emerged with what appeared to be a basket of muffins. "I need to get back to a meeting," Fiona said, trying to keep the edge from her voice. "Thank you for the food, but I really can't chat right now." Frank's smile didn't falter. "No need to chat, dear. We just want Howard to know we're thinking of him. We've known your dad for 30 years, watched him raise you on his own after your mama left. He's one of the good ones." The simple statement hit Fiona with unexpected force. This man had witnessed her childhood, had seen her father's struggles and sacrifices, while she was too young to fully comprehend them. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "I'll tell him you stopped by." When she returned to her video call, Fiona found it difficult to focus on leverage ratios and market projections. Her mind kept drifting to Frank's words. He's one of the good ones. Had she taken that goodness for granted? Had she allowed her pursuit of success to overshadow the relationship with the one person who had never let her down? The next day brought Howard home from the hospital. The ambulance service transferred him to a wheelchair, then to the converted study. Fiona had prepared herself mentally for his physical limitations, but she wasn't prepared for the frustration and anguish in his eyes as he struggled to communicate the simplest needs. But, he attempted, pointing shakily toward the bookshelf. "Book?" Fiona guessed, following his gaze. "You want a book?" He shook his head, frustration evident. Again his furrowed brow. Bathroom, blanket, bed. Each wrong guess increased his agitation until tears welled in his eyes. Finally, he managed to point more specifically to a small wooden box on the middle shelf. Fiona retrieved it, placing it gently in his lap. Howard's left hand trembled as he struggled with the latch. "Let me," Fiona offered, opening the box. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, spanning decades. With labored movements, Howard sifted through them until he found what he wanted. A photo of Fiona at her college graduation, standing proudly between her father and an older woman with silver hair. "Gah, Gran," Howard managed, tapping the older woman's face. "You want to call Grandma Rose?" Fiona asked, understanding dawning. Howard nodded emphatically, relief washing over his features. Fiona hadn't spoken to her paternal grandmother in years, though she vaguely recalled that the elderly woman now lived in a retirement community in nearby Burlington. The realization brought another wave of shame. How many family connections had she allowed to wither while she climbed the corporate ladder? In that moment, something shifted inside Fiona. The carefully constructed compartments of her life began to blur at the edges. This wasn't just a temporary disruption to her career. This was a fundamental challenge to how she had chosen to live. That evening, after settling Howard in bed with his medication, Fiona called Charlotte again. "I need you to cancel my appointments. For the next 2 weeks," she said without preamble. 2 weeks? Charlotte's voice rose in surprise. "But the Westlake merger—" "Daniel can handle the preliminary work," Fiona said, surprising herself with the concession. "I'll review everything remotely, but I can't be in New York right now. My father needs me." The words felt strange in her mouth, an admission of priorities she had never allowed herself before. For the first time in her adult life, Fiona was putting someone else's needs above her professional ambitions. As days turned into a week, Fiona established a routine. Mornings were spent helping her father with exercises prescribed by the visiting physical therapist. Afternoons, she worked remotely while Howard napped. Evenings, they sat together in the living room, the television providing background noise as Fiona read aloud from his favorite mystery novels. Communication remained difficult. Howard could understand what was said to him, but his own speech was limited to fragments and emotional outbursts. Fiona learned to interpret his gestures and expressions, to anticipate his needs before frustration overwhelmed him. It was exhausting, painstaking work that called on reserves of patience she hadn't known she possessed. The town's support continued despite Fiona's initial resistance. Eleanor from the church quilting circle brought a handmade lap blanket in Howard's favorite colors. The high school principal stopped by with a get-well card signed by the faculty. Howard had been the school's maintenance supervisor before his retirement. Dr. Mitchell, the local veterinarian, brought his gentle old therapy dog for a visit that prompted Howard's first genuine smile since the stroke. In this quaint New England community, where maple syrup harvesting was celebrated with a town festival and neighbors still brought casseroles during difficult times, Fiona rediscovered the warmth of community she had rejected. The local diner owner remembered her favorite breakfast from 20 years earlier, and former high school classmates rallied to help renovate the house to accommodate her father's wheelchair. These cultural touchpoints shaped Fiona's decisions, reminding her of values beyond financial success. For the first time, she found herself participating in the town's traditional spring planting celebration, accepting help from others, something the fiercely independent woman had always refused. What would happen at her father's first follow-up appointment? Would she be able to balance his care with the demands of her career? And what about the mysterious locked drawer in his desk, the one he kept glancing at with a worried expression? Fiona's world was shifting beneath her feet, challenging everything she thought she knew about success, family, and herself. As weeks turned into a month, Fiona faced numerous obstacles. Her firm threatened to replace her if she didn't return immediately. Her father's insurance denied coverage for essential therapy, and the ancient plumbing in the family home catastrophically failed during the harshest spring in decades. "This is unacceptable," Fiona snapped into her phone, pacing the kitchen, while contractors addressed the burst pipes in the bathroom. "My father has paid premiums to your company for over 40 years, and now you're denying coverage for medically necessary treatment. I want to speak to your supervisor immediately." The insurance representative's voice remained bland and unhelpful. "I understand your frustration, Ms. Bennett, but the policy clearly states—" "I don't care what the policy states," Fiona interrupted. "I care about my father receiving the care he needs. Transfer me to your legal department. I'm an investment." Banker who negotiates multi-million-dollar deals for a living. Trust me when I say you don't want me as an adversary. It was the same fierce advocacy she had always brought to her professional life, but now directed toward a deeply personal cause. Fiona had spent years viewing emotional investment as a weakness, a distraction from achievement. Now, she was discovering that passion could be a source of strength. The plumbing crisis coincided with a blizzard that blanketed the region in 2 feet of snow, effectively cutting off the small town for 3 days. Power flickered on and off, and the temperature in the house plummeted. Fiona moved Howard's bed closer to the wood stove, stoked the fire through the night and melted snow to flush toilets. She hadn't performed manual labor like this since childhood, when helping her father with chores had been part of daily life. Throughout the ordeal, Howard watched her with a mix of gratitude and concern. During a lucid moment, he managed to form a complete sentence. "You should go back." Fiona looked up from where she knelt before the wood stove, her face flushed from exertion. "Back to New York? Don't be ridiculous. I'm not leaving you alone in this condition." Howard shook his head, frustration evident. "Your life, career." Understanding dawned. He was worried about her sacrificing her career for his sake. Even now, barely able to speak, her father was thinking of her future, her happiness. "My life and career aren't going anywhere," Fiona said firmly. "Right now, this is where I need to be." The words surprised her as they left her mouth, not because they weren't true, but because she realized they were deeply, fundamentally true in a way she hadn't anticipated. In her Manhattan office, Fiona had commanded respect through intimidation and flawless performance. Here in Wakefield, she was learning a different kind of strength, one born of vulnerability and connection rather than isolation and self-sufficiency. As the weather improved, Fiona ventured into town more frequently. At the local diner, Maggie's Place, she found herself drawn into conversations with townspeople who shared stories about her father. "Your dad was the first person who welcomed us when we moved here," shared Elena Rodriguez, who owned the town's only bookstore. "He organized a group to help us unpack and introduced us to everyone. That was 15 years ago, and we've considered him family ever since." "When my Jake had his accident and couldn't work," added Maggie herself, wiping down the counter, "Howard came by every single day to help with maintenance around the diner. Wouldn't take a penny for it either." These stories revealed a side of her father Fiona had glimpsed, but never fully appreciated. While she'd been building her empire of wealth and influence in New York, Howard had been creating something perhaps more valuable, a network of genuine human connection. Two significant subplots emerged as spring slowly transformed the landscape. First, Fiona discovered a box of unsent letters her father had written to her mother, revealing a different story than the abandonment narrative she had believed her entire life. The discovery happened accidentally, while searching for insurance. Documents in her father's desk, Fiona found a false bottom in the bottom drawer. Beneath it lay a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with faded blue ribbon. Each was addressed to Marianne Bennett, but none bore a stamp or postmark. Fiona's hands trembled as she untied the ribbon. Her mother was a shadowy figure in her memory, more absence than presence. Howard had never spoken bitterly about his ex-wife, but had always changed the subject when Fiona asked questions. Eventually, she had stopped asking. The first letter was dated just 1 month after her mother's departure. "My dearest Marianne's," it began. "The doctors say your condition may improve with the new treatment. I pray every day for your recovery. Fiona asks for you constantly, and it breaks my heart to see her confusion." Condition? Treatment? These words contradicted everything Fiona had assumed about her mother's departure. She had always imagined Marianne Bennett simply walking away, choosing freedom over family responsibilities. But these letters suggested something far more complex. Letter after letter revealed a story of mental illness, hospitalizations, and treatments that had ultimately failed. Howard had written faithfully for years, updating his absent wife about their daughter's growth and accomplishments, assuring her of his unwavering love despite their separation. The final letter, dated on Fiona's 18th birthday, contained a photograph of her in her high school graduation gown. She's so much like you, brilliant, determined, beautiful, Howard had written. I've tried to tell her the truth about you so many times, but I fear she's constructed a narrative that protects her from pain. Perhaps someday she'll be ready to understand. Fiona sat motionless, letters scattered around her on the floor. The foundation of her understanding about her family, about herself, had just been fundamentally shaken. Why had her father never mailed these letters? Why had he allowed her to believe a simplistic story of abandonment rather than the more complicated truth? Simultaneously, she encountered her high school sweetheart, Gary Mitchell, now the town's doctor, who had never stopped loving her despite her abrupt departure for college. Their reunion occurred at Howard's follow-up appointment at the local clinic. Fiona had been expecting Dr. Palmer, the older physician who had treated her father at the hospital. Instead, a tall man with familiar blue eyes entered the examination room. "Gary," Fiona said, shock momentarily rendering her speechless. "Hello, Fiona," he replied with a small smile. "It's been a long time." Gary Mitchell had been her first love, the boy who had taken her to prom, who had talked about attending college together, who had promised forever with the earnest conviction of youth. Fiona had ended things abruptly when she received her Ivy League acceptance letter, convinced that sentimental attachments would only hold her back from achieving greatness. Now here he stood, a successful doctor in their hometown, regarding her with eyes that held recognition but no resentment. He examined Howard with gentle competence, explaining treatment options and progress markers with clarity and compassion. "You're doing remarkably well, Mr. Bennett," Gary told Howard, who beamed at the praise. "Your determination is paying off, and you've obviously got excellent care at home." He glanced at Fiona with professional appreciation that couldn't quite mask a deeper current of feeling. After the appointment, Gary asked Fiona to stay behind for a moment. "It's good to see you," he said simply, "despite the circumstances." "You too," Fiona replied, suddenly aware of how inadequate the words were. "I didn't know you'd returned to Wakefield. After medical school," Gary explained. "Rural communities need doctors, and this place is home." He hesitated, then asked, "How long will you be staying?" The question caught Fiona off guard. She'd been in Wakefield for nearly 6 weeks now, far longer than the few days she'd initially planned. Her leave of absence from Blackwood Financial had been extended twice. Charlotte called daily with updates and crises that increasingly seemed distant and unimportant compared to her father's incremental progress. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "As long as Dad needs me, I suppose." Gary nodded, understanding in his expression. "Well, if you need anything, medical or otherwise, you know where to find me." As they left the clinic, Fiona found herself wondering about the road not taken. What would her life have been like if she'd stayed with Gary, if she'd valued connection over achievement? The question was not one she would have entertained even 2 months ago. The first small twist occurred when Fiona found that her father had secretly been paying for piano lessons for underprivileged children in town for years, despite his modest pension. This revelation challenged her perception of meaningful contribution. She discovered this while sorting through his financial records, a task Howard had reluctantly agreed was necessary given his condition. Among the orderly files of utility bills and property tax statements, Fiona found monthly checks written to the Wakefield Arts Foundation with Piano Scholarship Fund noted in the memo line. "Dad," she asked during dinner that evening, "what's this piano scholarship fund you've been contributing to?" Howard looked momentarily flustered, then shrugged with his good shoulder in a gesture of dismissal. "It's not nothing," Fiona persisted. "These contributions represent almost 15% of your monthly pension." With visible effort, Howard formed the words, "You loved piano." Understanding dawned. "You're sponsoring piano lessons?" "For kids who can't afford them." Howard nodded, a hint of embarrassment coloring his features. Fiona recalled her own childhood piano lessons, how her father had worked extra shifts at the school to pay for them, how he had never missed a recital despite his exhaustion. Music had been her refuge during difficult times, a source of discipline and joy that had helped shape her character. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked softly. "Since retired," Howard managed. 8 years then, in New York. Fiona made charitable contributions that were strategically timed to maximize tax benefits and enhance her professional reputation. Her father's giving was different, personal, sustained, connected to his values and experiences. It had no practical benefit to him, yet clearly brought him satisfaction that had nothing to do with recognition or advantage. As spring thawed into summer, Fiona received news that her company had suffered significant losses without her expertise, leading to the second small twist. Her boss practically begging her to return with a substantial promotion offer. For the first time, Fiona hesitated at a career opportunity. "They've completely mishandled the Westlake merger," Charlotte reported during their daily call. "Daniel made promises he couldn't keep, and now the whole deal is in jeopardy. Mr. Harrington is desperate to get you back." As if on cue, Fiona's phone signaled another incoming call from Jeffrey Harrington himself, the CEO of Blackwood Financial. "Fiona," he said without preamble when she accepted the call, "this family emergency of yours has gone on long enough. We need you back in New York immediately." Once, such a direct summons from Harrington would have sent Fiona racing to meet his expectations. Now she felt a surprising calm as she replied, "I'm afraid that's not possible right now, Jeff. My father's condition requires my presence." "I understand personal difficulties," Harrington said in a tone that suggested he understood nothing of the sort. "But we're prepared to offer you the position of Executive Vice President if you return by Monday. That's a corner office on the 50th floor, Fiona. A seat on the board. Everything you've worked for." Everything she'd worked for. The words echoed in Fiona's mind as she glanced through the kitchen window to where Howard sat on the porch, soaking in the early summer sunshine. For 15 years she had pursued professional advancement with single-minded determination, convinced it was the path to fulfillment. Now, she wasn't so certain. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I can't commit to a return date yet. My father's health has to be my priority right now." Harrington's tone chilled. "I need an answer, Fiona, today. This opportunity won't remain open indefinitely." "Then I have to decline," Fiona replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "My father sacrificed everything to give me opportunities. I won't abandon him when he needs me most." After ending the call, Fiona expected to feel panic or regret. Instead, she experienced a strange lightness, as if she'd set down a heavy burden she'd been carrying for years. A medium twist unfolded when Fiona discovered financial documents revealing her father had sold his treasured classic car and taken a second mortgage on the house to pay for her Ivy League education, sacrifices she had never known about. This discovery intensified her guilt about her years of neglect. The documents surfaced during Fiona's ongoing organization of her father's affairs. A file labeled Fiona's Education contained loan agreements, payment schedules, and a bill of sale for a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, the vintage car her father had spent years restoring in the barn behind their house. Howard had sold it in August 2005, just weeks before Fiona left for college. The second mortgage documents were dated the following year, coinciding with a period when Fiona had called home asking for additional funds to cover expenses her scholarship didn't include: an apartment in a better neighborhood, professional clothes for networking events, a spring break trip with classmates she hoped to forge connections with. Howard had never mentioned these sacrifices. He had simply sent the money, encouraging her to take advantage of every opportunity. Fiona had assumed he could afford it, or perhaps, more honestly, she had chosen not to question the source of the funds that facilitated her ambitions. Now sitting surrounded by evidence of her father's quiet sacrifices, Fiona was forced to confront the selfishness that had characterized many of her choices. While she had been pursuing wealth and status, her father had been mortgaging his future to secure hers. That evening, as they sat together on the porch watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, Fiona found herself saying, "I found the papers about the Chevy, Dad, and the second mortgage." Howard stiffened slightly, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Why didn't you tell me?" Fiona asked gently. "I would have found another way to pay for school." With considerable effort, Howard turned to face her. "You're Dreams, he said haltingly. Worth everything. Tears welled in Fiona's eyes. But I didn't even thank you properly. I just took, and then I stayed away because I was too busy building a career to visit my own father. Howard shook his head, vehemently reaching for her hand with his good one. Proud, he insisted, so proudly said of you. The simple statement broke something open inside Fiona. For years she had driven herself relentlessly, believing that achievement was the only measure of her worth. Now she understood that her father's love had never been conditional on her success. He had sacrificed for her dreams not because he valued achievement above all, but because he valued her happiness. Howard's health began showing small improvements, and Fiona adapted the garden shed into a physical therapy space using knowledge from online research, leading to another medium twist, unexpected improvement in his condition that even the doctors found remarkable. The local community newspaper featured their story, calling it a miracle of dedication. The idea for the therapy space came after Fiona observed Howard's frustration with the limited exercises he could perform in the house. The garden shed, her father's weekend retreat for years, sat unused since his stroke. With help from Sam Henderson, the local handyman, Fiona cleared out the gardening equipment and transformed the space into a rehabilitation center. She ordered equipment online, resistance bands, balance tools, specially designed puzzles to help with cognitive function. Using her analytical skills, she researched stroke recovery techniques, creating a comprehensive program tailored to her father's specific deficits. Howard approached the challenge with the same determination he had brought to everything in his life, from raising a child alone to maintaining the town's school buildings. Dr. Mitchell, Gary, visited regularly to monitor Howard's progress and adjust his treatment plan. During one such visit, he observed a therapy session in the converted shed. "This is remarkable," he commented, watching Howard successfully grasp and place small pegs into a board, a task that had been impossible just weeks earlier. "His fine motor control is returning much faster than I anticipated. We work at it every day," Fiona explained, "morning and evening. I've been timing his progress and graphing the improvements." She showed Gary the spreadsheet she'd created, applying her financial analyst's precision to her father's recovery data. Gary studied the chart, impressed. "You've got a gift for this, Fiona. Have you ever considered a career in healthcare or therapy?" The question caught her off guard. Throughout her life, Fiona had defined herself by her ambition in the financial sector. The idea that her talents might be applicable in a completely different field, one focused on healing rather than wealth accumulation, had never occurred to her. The local newspaper's feature on Howard's recovery became the talk of Wakefield. "Local man makes miraculous recovery through daughter's dedication," read the headline. The article detailed how Fiona had created a customized rehabilitation program, adapting techniques usually found only in specialized facilities. "It's not just the physical exercises," Dr. Mitchell was quoted as saying. "It's the consistent support and motivation Ms. Bennett provides. We're seeing evidence that this personalized approach can be more effective than standard protocols in certain cases." Fiona found herself unexpectedly moved by the article's portrayal of her relationship with her father. For years, she had viewed her worth primarily through the lens of professional achievement. Now, she was being recognized for something entirely different, her capacity for care and commitment. The third medium twist came when Fiona's mother unexpectedly reached out after seeing the newspaper article online. The woman who had abandoned them was now asking for forgiveness and offering to help. Fiona initially refused the connection, but her father's eyes lit up at the mention of his former wife. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Its subject, lines starkly simple, about Howard. "I saw the article about your father's recovery," it began. "My name is Marianne Bennett. I'm your mother. After all these years, I understand if you want nothing to do with me, but I'd like to help if I can. I live just 3 hours away in Albany now." Fiona stared at the screen, emotions churning through her, anger, curiosity, resentment, and beneath it all a childlike longing she thought she'd outgrown decades ago. Her finger hovered over the delete button. Instead, she printed the email and brought it to Howard. "Dad," she said carefully, "I've received a message from Mom, she's seen the article about your recovery and wants to help. Howard's expression transformed in a way Fiona had never witnessed. Hope and fear and something else she couldn't quite identify flashed across his features. With trembling fingers, he pointed to the letters Fiona had discovered weeks earlier. "So you read?" he asked. Fiona nodded. "Yes, I know about her illness now. Why didn't you ever tell me the truth?" Howard closed his eyes briefly, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, it was with careful concentration on each word. "You were so young. Easier to be angry than scared." The simple insight struck Fiona with the force of revelation. As a child, she had indeed found comfort in anger toward her absent mother. It had been easier to believe in abandonment than to face the frightening reality of mental illness, an illness that might, in her child's mind, have been hereditary or contagious. "What happened to her?" Fiona asked. "After the last letter?" Howard shook his head, indicating he didn't know. Then, with obvious effort, "Should meet your choice." Fiona sat with the decision for days, torn between lifetime habits of self-protection and the new understanding she was developing about forgiveness and second chances. Finally, she composed a brief reply. "I'm not ready for a meeting yet, but I'm willing to talk by phone. For my father's sake." A large twist occurred when Fiona discovered her father had been diagnosed with his condition years earlier, but had hidden it from her to avoid interfering with her career. His recent stroke was not the beginning, but a progression of a long-term illness he had been fighting silently. The revelation came during a conversation with Gary after Howard's monthly checkup. "His blood pressure is still concerning," Gary noted, reviewing the charts. "Has he been taking the medication consistently for the past few years?" "Years?" Fiona echoed, confused. "He was only prescribed medication after the stroke." Gary looked up sharply. "Fiona, your father was diagnosed with hypertension and early signs of vascular dementia almost 3 years ago. I assumed you knew." The world seemed to tilt beneath Fiona's feet. "That's impossible. He never mentioned any health problems." But even as she protested, memories surfaced. Her father's increasingly brief phone calls, his occasional confusion about dates, his reluctance to discuss his doctor visits when she asked perfunctory questions about his health. "He made me promise not to tell you," Gary admitted, looking uncomfortable. "He said you were on the verge of a major promotion, and he didn't want to distract you with his old man problems, as he put it." That night, when Howard was settled in bed, Fiona confronted him gently. "Dad, why didn't you tell me about your diagnosis? I could have helped sooner." Howard regarded her with a mixture of resignation and tenderness. "Your life, important. My job, let you fly." "But I would have wanted to know," Fiona insisted, fighting back tears. "I could have been here for you before things got so bad." Howard shook his head slightly. "Watched you build your life so proud." With tremendous effort, he added, "No regrets." The selflessness of his choice humbled Fiona completely. While she had been obsessively pursuing her ambitions, her father had been silently managing a progressive illness, determined not to burden her with his needs. The realization forced her to reconsider everything she had assumed about love, sacrifice, and what constituted a successful life. As summer approached, Fiona established a remote working arrangement with her firm, surprising herself with this compromise. She transformed the home office and began balancing caregiving with selective consulting projects. The town doctor's frequent house calls evolved into dinners and walks along the lake, reawakening feelings Fiona had suppressed for decades. "I've been thinking about what you said," Fiona told Charlotte during one of their now weekly calls. "About consulting rather than returning to full-time management." "Really?" Charlotte sounded surprised. "That's a significant shift, Fiona. Are you sure?" "I'm not sure about anything anymore," Fiona admitted with unexpected candor. "But I know I can't leave my father, and I'm finding I don't want to leave Wakefield either. Not yet, anyway." The arrangement was unprecedented at Blackwood Financial, but Fiona's track record and client relationships gave her leverage. She would retain her most significant clients, working remotely and traveling to New York, only for critical meetings. Her salary would decrease, but so would her stress level and time commitment. With Howard's mobility improving, Fiona converted. The dining room they rarely used into a functional office. High-speed internet was installed, video conferencing equipment set up. She established clear boundaries around her work hours, ensuring that her father's care remained her priority while maintaining her professional responsibilities. Gary Mitchell became a regular visitor, initially under the guise of monitoring Howard's recovery, but increasingly because of the connection rekindling between him and Fiona. They walked along the lake shore in the golden evening light, rediscovering each other as adults rather than the teenagers they had once been. "You know what I remember most clearly?" Gary asked one evening as they sat on the dock, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and rose. "That you were the only person in our high school who knew exactly what they wanted. Everyone else was drifting, experimenting, but you had a plan." Fiona smiled ruefully. "I was certainly determined." "It was more than that," Gary countered. "It was like you could see a future the rest of us couldn't imagine yet. I admired that so much, even when it took you away from here, away from me." The honesty in his words touched Fiona deeply. "I thought I needed to escape Wakefield to become successful," she admitted. "Now I'm not so sure what success even means." Gary's hand found hers in the gathering dusk. "Maybe that's the real journey, figuring out what matters most." The second large twist came when Fiona's mother arrived in town, revealing that she had left not from lack of love, but due to severe postpartum depression that had been misdiagnosed and mistreated in an era when mental health was poorly understood. The family secrets unraveled, creating space for healing and forgiveness. Despite Fiona's resistance to an in-person meeting, Marianne Bennett appeared unannounced at the house one afternoon in early July. Fiona opened the door to find a slender woman with silver-streaked dark hair standing uncertainly on the porch, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. "Fiona," the woman said, her voice wavering, "I know I should have waited for your permission, but I couldn't stay away once I knew Howard was ill." Fiona stood frozen, taking in the features that were both familiar from photographs and utterly strange in person. She had imagined this moment countless times throughout her childhood and youth, sometimes with fury, sometimes with desperate longing. The reality was disorienting. "This isn't a good time," she managed finally. "Please," Marianne said, "5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Before Fiona could respond, Howard's voice called weakly from the living room. "Who's there?" Marianne's eyes filled with tears at the sound. "Is that him? Could I just see him just once?" Fiona hesitated, torn between protective instinct and the memory of how Howard's eyes had lit up at the mention of his former wife. Finally, she stepped aside. 5 minutes, she agreed stiffly. What followed was a reunion that transformed Fiona's understanding of her family history. Howard, seeing Marianne, attempted to stand from his wheelchair, a physical effort he had not managed before. When Marianne rushed forward to embrace him, both were weeping openly. "I'm sorry," Marianne repeated, holding Howard's face between her palms. "I'm so sorry I couldn't be stronger." "Not your fault," Howard insisted, his good hand clutching hers desperately. Fiona stood apart, witnessing an intimacy that excluded yet deeply involved her. The narrative she had constructed throughout. Her life, of a mother who had chosen to leave, who had valued freedom above family, was crumbling before her eyes. Later, when Howard had tired and been helped to bed, Marianne explained to Fiona what the letters had only hinted at. After Fiona's birth, Marianne had suffered severe postpartum depression that evolved into psychosis. In the early 1980s, mental health treatment was primitive compared to modern approaches, particularly in rural areas. "They gave me medications that made everything worse," Marianne explained quietly. "I became convinced that I was harming you, that you would be better off without me. When I tried to hurt myself, they institutionalized me." The state hospital where Marianne had been committed practiced approaches now considered barbaric: over-medication, isolation, even electroconvulsive therapy without adequate support. Howard had fought to have her transferred to better facilities, but their limited finances and the mental health policies of the era created insurmountable barriers. "Your father visited every week for years," Marianne said, her voice thick with emotion. "He brought photos of you, read me your school reports. He never gave up on me, even after I signed the divorce papers, because I thought it would free him to find happiness elsewhere." "But why didn't you come back once you were better?" Fiona asked, the question that had haunted her childhood finally finding voice. Marianne's eyes filled with tears. "By the time I was stable enough for discharge, you were a teenager, Howard, and I agreed that disrupting your life again might do more harm than good. I moved to my sister's home in Albany, got treatment there, rebuilt my life slowly. I've spent 25 years working as a peer counselor for women with postpartum mood disorders, trying to ensure no one else loses their family the way I lost mine." The revelation was both devastating and healing. Fiona had built her life around emotional self-sufficiency, convinced that depending on others led inevitably to abandonment and pain. Now she was confronting the possibility that her mother's absence had been the result not of choice, but of illness and circumstance, and that the protective emotional walls she had constructed might have been unnecessary. During the Maple Harvest Festival in autumn, Fiona experienced the final large twist. Her corporate firm offered to open a rural Vermont satellite office with her as regional director, a position created specifically to retain her talent while allowing her to remain in her hometown. The proposal came from Jeffrey Harrington himself, who arrived unannounced at the Bennett home one crisp October morning. Fiona, dressed casually in jeans and a flannel shirt for the town's Maple Festival, was startled to find her CEO standing on her porch in his immaculate suit. "Quite a different look for you, Bennett," he commented, taking in her informal attire. "What are you doing here, Jeff?" Fiona asked directly, ushering him into the living room where Howard was reading the newspaper, his speech and mobility significantly improved after months of intensive therapy. "I've come with a proposition," Harrington announced, nodding respectfully to Howard before turning back to Fiona. "We're losing clients without you in New York. Your remote consulting arrangement has been adequate, but the firm needs more of your expertise." Fiona crossed her arms, preparing for another attempt to lure her back to Manhattan. "My position hasn't changed. My father's care remains my priority." "Exactly," Harrington said, surprising her, "which is why we want to bring Blackwood to you instead of the other way around." The proposal was unprecedented. A satellite office in Burlington, just 40 minutes from Wakefield, with Fiona as regional director. She would oversee a small team serving clients throughout New England while developing new business in an untapped market. The position would require some travel, but would allow her to remain based in Vermont. "Why the change of heart?" Fiona asked suspiciously. Harrington's expression was calculating but honest. "Because you've proven your value, and the current arrangement isn't maximizing your potential contribution to the firm. I'm a pragmatist, Fiona. If you won't come to us, we'll come to you, at least partially." Later, after Harrington had departed with Fiona's promise to consider the offer, Howard chuckled softly. "Man knows, losing battle when he sees one." Fiona smiled, realizing how much her father's speech had improved. "Is that what this is? A battle?" Howard shook his head. "Compromise. Something. You learning. Finally." His gentle teasing held profound truth. Throughout her career, Fiona had approached life as a series of competitions to be won, rather than relationships to be nurtured. The past 6 months had taught her that meaningful success might lie in balance rather than dominance, in connection rather than conquest. As they prepared to attend the Maple Festival that afternoon, Howard's first major public outing since his stroke, Fiona felt a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. Perhaps she could integrate the driven, ambitious aspects of herself with the compassionate, connected person she was becoming. Perhaps having it all meant something different than she had always assumed. The climax occurred during Thanksgiving dinner, when her father, who had gradually regained limited speech, revealed his greatest fear had been becoming a burden to his daughter. With tears streaming down her face, Fiona explained how caring for him had saved her from a life devoid of genuine connection. The holiday gathering was unlike any in Fiona's adult life. Instead of the sterile, catered affairs she had occasionally attended in New York, where networking opportunities often took precedence over celebration, this was a warm, chaotic family event. Marianne had been invited, along with Gary and his parents. The dining room table groaned under the weight of traditional dishes, many brought by neighbors who stopped by throughout the day. Howard, seated at the head of the table, had regained enough strength and coordination to carve the turkey himself, a task he performed with deliberate concentration and evident pride. His speech, while still sometimes halting, had improved dramatically, allowing him to participate fully in the conversation. As they finished the main course, Howard tapped his water glass for attention. "I want to say something," he announced. The table quieted immediately. "This year, not what I expected," he began carefully. "Stroke not on my calendar." Gentle laughter rippled around the table at his unexpected humor. "But brought my daughter home. Greatest blessing." Fiona felt tears threatening and blinked rapidly. "To contain them," Howard continued, each word chosen with care and delivered with determination. "My biggest fear had not death, not pain." He looked directly at Fiona, his eyes clear and earnest. "Fear of being burden to you, taking you from your life." "Dad," Fiona began, but Howard raised his hand to indicate he wasn't finished. "Let me finish. Hard to talk. Want to say this." He drew a deep breath. "Watched you all these years, so successful, so alone, like me, after your mother left. Success outside, emptiness inside." The simple assessment struck Fiona with the force of absolute truth. Her father, in his quiet way, had recognized what she had refused to acknowledge, that her professional achievements had come at the cost of emotional connection. "When I got sick," Howard continued, "thought I ruined your life, taking your career, your freedom." Fiona could no longer contain her tears. They flowed freely as she reached for her father's hand across the table. "You didn't ruin anything," she said fervently. "You saved me, Dad. I was drowning in success and didn't even know it. Coming home, taking care of you, it's given me back parts of myself I thought were gone forever." In that moment of vulnerability, surrounded by people who had become a community of care, Fiona recognized the truth she had been approaching gradually over the past months. That her father's illness, rather than being a burden that had derailed her life, had actually redirected it toward greater wholeness and authenticity. The resolution unfolded as Fiona converted part of their renovated home into a remote workspace where she balanced a redefined career with family care. The small garden shed therapy room expanded into a community health initiative for rural seniors. Her renewed relationship with the town doctor blossomed into a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. The Burlington satellite office of Blackwood Financial opened in January, with Fiona commuting 3 days a week, while working from home the other 2. She assembled a team that combined financial expertise with an ethical approach she had previously considered unnecessary in the ruthlessly competitive world of investment banking. Meanwhile, the successful rehabilitation techniques she had developed for her father attracted attention from healthcare providers throughout the region. With encouragement from Gary, Fiona documented her methods and began offering workshops for families caring for stroke survivors in rural areas with limited access to specialized services. The garden shed, now insulated, expanded, and equipped with state-of-the-art therapy tools, became a prototype for what Fiona called the Homecoming Project, an initiative to develop affordable, accessible rehabilitation spaces in underserved communities. She leveraged her financial expertise and business connections to secure funding and partnerships. Howard continued to improve, eventually requiring only a cane for longer walks. He rekindled a friendship with Marianne that gradually evolved into a relationship neither of them had anticipated. Their shared history, both painful and precious, provided a foundation for a connection that was neither a simple renewal of their previous marriage nor an entirely new beginning, but something uniquely their own. Fiona and Gary's relationship deepened through their collaboration on the homecoming project and their shared care for Howard. Gary's steady presence and unassuming wisdom complemented Fiona's drive and strategic thinking. Together, they created a partnership that honored both her ambition and her newly acknowledged need for connection. In the final scene, Fiona's father walked her down the aisle at her wedding, slowly with a cane but independently, a triumph of patience and rehabilitation. His whispered words captured the journey's essence. "You didn't just give me back my life, you found yours in the process." The spring wedding took place in the garden behind the Bennett home, where flowering apple trees created a natural cathedral. Fiona had chosen simplicity over extravagance, a reflection of her evolved values. Her colleagues from Blackwood attended alongside Wakefield neighbours, the two aspects of her life no longer segregated, but integrated. As the music began, Fiona took her father's arm at the back garden gate. "Ready?" she asked softly. Howard stood tall, his cane in his free hand but his weight balanced without it. "Been ready your whole life," he replied. With deliberate steps, father and daughter walked the petal-strewn path toward where Gary waited beneath an arch of early roses. Each step represented months of painful therapy, of falls and frustrations, of small victories celebrated and setbacks overcome together. When they reached the altar, Howard turned to Fiona, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He leaned close to whisper in her ear, "You didn't just give me back my life, you found yours in the process." The simple truth resonated deep within Fiona's heart. The year that had begun with crisis had transformed her in ways she could never have anticipated or sought out deliberately. Her father's illness, what she had initially viewed as an unwelcome interruption to her carefully planned life, had actually been the catalyst for her most significant growth. As she joined hands with Gary, Fiona glanced at the assembled guests. Her mother, teary-eyed in the front row, Charlotte, who had become a friend rather than merely an assistant, neighbors who had become family, clients who had become partners in creating ethical business practices. The community she had once fled in pursuit of success had become the foundation of a richer, more authentic life than she had ever imagined possible. The year-long journey transformed Fiona from a woman who measured worth in bonuses and promotions to one who recognized that true success includes compassion, community, and connection. Her repayment to her father wasn't just in physical care, but in embracing the values he had tried to instill all along. That love, not achievement, defines a life well lived. Fiona's professional life remained important to her. Her intelligence and ambition were integral aspects of her personality that she no longer felt compelled to suppress or exaggerate. But these qualities now existed in balance with emotional openness, with willingness to depend on others and allow them to depend on her, with an understanding that vulnerability required greater courage than self-sufficiency ever had. As she and Gary celebrated with their guests under the stars that evening, Fiona found herself watching her father dancing slowly with her mother, their movements careful but joyful. The sight embodied everything she had learned. That healing was possible even after decades of separation. That strength often looked different than she had once believed, that second chances sometimes arrived in unexpected packages. The story that had begun with ambulance lights flashing through a Manhattan apartment window had evolved into something neither Fiona nor Howard could have predicted. A narrative not of obligation and sacrifice, but of transformation and discovery. In caring for her father, Fiona had indeed repaid his years of love and devotion, but the true gift had been mutual. In helping him reclaim his life, she had found her own. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.